Hello there, everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. And as you can see from the title and thumbnail of today's video, today we're going to be talking about how Kent Hovind recently named yours truly in a lawsuit that he filed. Now, I'm not the defendant in this lawsuit, so don't get too worried about things if you're concerned about me being sued or something by Kent Hovind. But I am mentioned by name in the lawsuit in particular that Kent Hovind filed, which is why I'm discussing this in today's video. So as you can see, I have this court document. It was given to me, and I think the source of the document is Robert Beatty, is the one that who provided it to the person who gave it to me. So I'm just looking at this as someone who is given something, and it is very interesting, especially since I'm mentioned by name. Now, it might be easy for you guys watching this on YouTube with a full screen to read the document, but here on OBS, I can't make out what that document says. So I got it brought up on my phone. So this document is a defamation suit that was filed against Mark Stoney by Kent Hovind, Chris Jones, that's right, the convicted pedophile Chris Jones, and Paul Hansen. It was filed on December 10th, 2025, so 2 months ago. 2 months ago this was done, and I'm just now learning about it. And I'm going to read the introduction. Plaintiffs Kent E. Hovind, Christopher Jones, and Paul John Hansen were defamed with actual malice by defendant Mark Stoney by deliberate acts of false, malicious, and serious allegations of acts of moral turpitude and criminal behavior. The plaintiffs have not engaged in any such conduct, and the statements made by the defendant have been found provably false. The defendants bring this suit against defendant Stoney for defamation, defamation by implication, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Oh no, it's just totally defaming Chris Jones by calling him a convicted pedophile. That all sounds well and good as long as you ignore the fact that back in 2009, Chris Jones was convicted of molesting a whole bunch of underage boys, which makes him, by definition, legally and culturally, a convicted pedophile. Something that even Kent Hovind himself admitted is true. Because when Kent Hovind went on Brett Keen's channel back in 2022 to foolishly try to defend himself and Chris Jones, he admitted that Chris Jones was a convicted pedophile, but that he actually wasn't a pedophile, even though he was convicted of being one. And this means that Chris Jones was convicted of being a pedophile before he brought Zaire to Dinosaur Adventureland in 2019. Of course, we learned that Zaire, according to Zaire himself, was molested by Chris Jones, which led to the arrest of Chris Jones back in March of 2023, almost 3 years ago. But yes, Mark Stoney's just making the whole thing up to defame all you guys. Sure, yeah, Mark Stoney's just making up that Chris Jones is a convicted pedophile, which he is. He was for almost a decade before he brought Zaire to DAL in 2019. He's defaming Kent Hovind by accusing him of being a pedo enabler, which Kent Hovind was a pedo enabler for Chris Jones, because when Chris Jones brought Zaire to DAL in 2019, Kent Hovind allowed him onto the DAL property with Zaire in tow, even though Zaire is not a blood relative of Chris Jones, and he made sure that Chris Jones and Zaire stayed under the same roof, unsupervised, in a house that was isolated from the rest of DAL and all of its inhabitants. And we know for a fact that one of the mornings that Chris Jones and Zaire were there, they were found in bed together. So yeah, Kent Hovind is very much a pedo enabler. He did everything possible to allow something really bad to happen to Zaire. And of course, Zaire says that he was molested by Chris Jones, which I'm pretty sure is what led to Chris Jones being arrested 3 years ago. Now, let's start reading through the facts section. Over the course of several years, defendant Stoney acted with actual malice to cause reputable harm to the plaintiffs. Defendant Stoney lodged false accusations against the plaintiffs, such as accusing DAL of being a nexus for pedophiles, a child sex trafficking ring, and a cult. Well, the Dinosaur Adventureland compound very much functions like a cult compound, and Kent Hovind very much is a cult of personality, much less running an actual cult, because all the people who work at DAL, by and large, live there on the grounds with Kent Hovind, and therefore, in order to stay there and be in his good graces, they have to follow all the rules that Kent Hovind lays out, and they don't dare speak against him because oftentimes these people come to DAL with nowhere else to go, and they're basically stuck there. Mark Stoney was someone who worked and lived at DAL before he started speaking out against Kent Hovind, and we've had other people who have worked at and lived at DAL who have come out and spoken about these things, and so we know that these things are true. I have some of their testimony in videos on my channel in a separate Kent Hovind Exposed playlist. But let's continue. He established himself as a crusader railing against his own falsely manufactured conspiracy while putting the lives of the plaintiffs and everyone living at DAL at risk with wild conspiracy theories including kidnapping, drugging, raping, murdering, and burying bodies on the property. Defendant Stoney weaponized local, state, and federal agencies against Plaintiff Jones in the pursuit of his personal vendetta against Plaintiff Hovind and DAL. Oh, so you mean after Mark Stoney finally made contact with Zaire and Zaire told him that Chris Jones molested him, you mean Mark Stoney actually reached out to the authorities and reported it to them, and that's what led to Chris Jones being arrested 3 years ago? Say it isn't so! Stoney's smear campaign was picked up by other Hovind-hating YouTubers, including Atheist Jr., TTOR, hi guys! Lies of the Devil, That Nerdy Trucker Billy, Robert Beatty, Big Bad Mama, Cindy Lincoln, and others. Stoney established himself as a heroic crusader fighting against an evil conspiracy which he himself created. Submitted on this, the 10th day of December 2025, and you have Kent Hovind, Chris Jones, and Paul Hansen signing the document. So yes, we have two claims being made about me by Kent Hovind, Chris Jones, and Paul John Hansen. The first claim they make about me is that I am a Hovind-hating YouTuber. I've said this many times before in the past, but for those of you who are new here, when I first became a young Earth creationist very early on in that conversion to that view of creationism, I came across Kent Hovind's creation seminar series that he did back in the day. And I was a huge fan of those seminars, to the point where when I first started my TTOR blog, I actually made a whole page on my blog that embedded each part of Kent Hovind's creationism seminar series into the page, so that way people who came to my site looking for evidence of young Earth creationism and evidence that evolution in deep time is false, they had a whole seminar series by Kent Hovind to go through providing such evidence. I would say that I was a Kent Hovind super fan based on that creation seminar series. That's what I knew him for, and I knew he had gone to prison for tax-related reasons, but at that point I didn't think anything of that because I didn't know the full story. But it was after Kent Hovind got out of prison and he started going through women like it was a sport, and he started cheating on his wives and divorcing them and then marrying new ones. He just started doing that over and over again. That's what clued me into this guy is not really a saved Christian based on his behavior. And then I find out about how he's friends with Chris Jones, a convicted pedophile and how he's been running cover for Chris Jones for years. And apparently to this day, he's still running cover for Chris Jones because him and Chris Jones both are signed as plaintiffs. And so over the course of time, I went from being a Kent Hovind supporter in terms of what I thought of him to realizing what a criminal scumbag that he is. And if acknowledging that Kent Hovind is a criminal scumbag who is literally associating himself closely with a convicted pedophile and doing whatever he can to whitewash this convicted pedophile's crimes, if that makes me a Hovind hater, then by golly, I guess I'm a Hovind hater. But I'd like people to know that I used to be a Kent Hovind fan about 10 years ago. Notice the other thing, though, that Kent Hovind said about me. Not only am I a Hovind-hating YouTuber, even though my videos about Kent Hovind are just a tiny fraction of all the videos that I make. So notice how the other claim made by Kent Hovind is that I merely picked up Mark Stoney's smear campaign. In other words, all the exposés I made about the Kent Hovind, Chris Jones situation, all the other videos I've made exposing Kent Hovind on other topics, that was just me regurgitating whatever Mark Stoney says. Never mind the fact when you actually watch my videos, I don't quote Mark Stoney at all. And that's because my information against Kent Hovind, for the most part, doesn't come from Mark Stoney. Now, when I provided audio recordings of Zaire and his mother talking about how Chris Jones molested Zaire, yes, that did come from Mark Stoney because he posted the audio recordings of his conversations with them to his YouTube channel. The audio recordings stand on their own merit. Mark Stoney didn't produce those out of thin air. He didn't use AI to make those. AI tools weren't really a thing back when that phone call happened. So yeah, most of the information that I used to expose Kent Hovind and Chris Jones regarding that whole situation, most of that information does not come from Mark Stoney. And the little bit that does, well, it really isn't Mark Stoney saying these things. It's Mark Stoney providing audio recordings of his conversations with Zaire and his mother. So it seems like things haven't changed much for Kent Hovind. Back in 2022, after I put out my original expose on the Kent Hovind Chris Jones situation, and after I participated in an 11-hour live stream exposing Kent Hovind over the Chris Jones situation, Kent Hovind actually did a live stream after that on Brett Keen's channel, and he indirectly accused me and everyone else who criticized him on that live stream of being a pedophile because we dared to criticize him running cover for the convicted pedophile Chris Jones. That's right, Kent Hovind indirectly accused me of being a pedo after Brett Keen brought me up by name and asked him to respond to me. And after floundering around for a little bit, all Kent Hovind could do was indirectly accuse me of being a pedophile. But Kent Hovind in the 4 years since then has gone from indirectly accusing me of being a pedophile to now accusing me of being a Hovind hater who just regurgitates everything that Mark Stoney says. Not much has changed in Kent Hovind's world. He's still a scumbag, and now he's filing a frivolous lawsuit against Mark Stoney in an attempt to cover up all this stuff in order to get people to shut up about Kent Hovind's sins and his interference that he's running for Chris Jones, trying to get people to shut up about the whole Chris Jones-Kent Hovind situation. And that's why people like me are named in this defamation suit against Mark Stoney. Apparently this is supposed to be some kind of wake-up call against me, to try and get me to shut up about this whole thing, and I refuse. Kent Hovind can shove it where the sun don't shine, because I will not back down on any of the things that I have reported on my channel in the past regarding him and Chris Jones. Yeah, nice try, Kent Hovind, but if you think naming me in a defamation suit against Mark Stoney is going to get me to shut up or back down on the whole Chris Jones situation that I exposed back in 2022, you're dreaming. You're literally and clinically insane if you think this defamation suit against Mark Stoney is going to slow me down in any way, shape, or form.